continuing on, we're going to, I'm just going to mention the domain archaea. We already kind of mentioned them in the previous video. They were mostly extremophiles is what they kind of generally call them. They're in salty environments, high temperature, underneath like really cold areas. And so I'm not going to talk about them very much, and if you want to, you can read about them, but in terms of testing, you just need to know that they are a group. All right, and that one chart that I showed you that was kind of comparing the archaea with the eukarya with the prokaryotes. All right. Now, so we're going to go into the domain archaea. Archaea, of course, I'm sorry, eukarya. Eukarya, of course, are eukaryotes, and eukaryotes mean that they have membrane-bound organelles, in particular the nucleus, which contains chromosomes instead of a single strand of DNA, as well as many other membrane-bound organelles like the endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi bodies, etc. Okay? So these are, generally speaking, the unicellular group is called protists, and that's kind of an old name, but it's still a convenient name. This is a very, very diverse group. They have like precursor organisms to all the other multicellular groups, and in fact, that's how they used to be divided: pre-fungi, or fungi-like, plant-like, or animal-like. And they would have some characteristics that were part of fungi, plants, or animals, and that was a useful designation. But now with the DNA analysis, things have changed up a little bit, but it's still kind of useful to keep in mind. Fungi-like would be heterotrophic by absorption, and generally speaking, all of these would have sexual reproduction. Plants would be, of course, autotrophic, and animals would be heterotrophic by ingestion. Animals in particular would be motile. Fungi would also be slime producing, right? So those are typical sort of things that would be like pre-fungi, pre-plant, pre-animal. They are very nutritionally diverse, pretty much any of the types that we talked about. And they are also reproductively diverse. Some of them are asexual, although most of them are tending towards the sexual, or they may have an asexual portion of their life cycle and a sexual portion. So there's, everything is possible within this group. So it's super, super diverse. And most of them are aquatic in some way. That doesn't mean they have to be marine or fresh water. They might just be living in very damp environments, including soils and or mucous membranes or something like that. All right, so we're going to go through the groups with this video. First, before we start going through the groups, I want to just kind of show you some things. So this overhead here is in your book, and these are all the things that we already talked about. In other words, domain bacteria had the things that we just went over, and then the domain archaea would have these groups in it, and then eukarya is now where we are in terms of discussion. All right, the other thing I wanted to show you was that this is from the back. Let's see, this is from your chapter, and I wanted to show you this because in the red is where I designated that whether it's a supergroup, a kingdom, or a phyla, and it's not clear from this diagram what's what, so that's why I labeled it for you. Supergroups are just groups above, so they're below domain and above the kingdom. All right, so they're kind of big groups of organisms. So these are all supergroups over here. The kingdoms are going to be the next group down. So that's this one, that's these, and these. Okay, so those are all the kingdoms. And then everything else is a phyla. So, for example, we don't have phyla listed for these, but we do for all of those. Okay, these are phyla over here. And we don't have any phyla listed for these, but we do for those. All right. So in terms of classification, you need to know these, and it's obviously somewhat confusing. All right. I made this handout for you in the study guide, so this is probably useful for you to take notes in. It starts off, I have the classification just like I had it listed, but this is in a different format. Supergroups with the kingdoms underneath, and the subgroups of that of those kingdoms, whether or not these are going to be called phyla or not. Currently they are not, but perhaps in the future. All right, the supergroup SAR, kingdom alveolata, and then so forth. So you can see I have it divided for you, I think pretty much correctly. I don't think there's any mistakes on here, but there might be, because they they changed the book now and then, and I'm pretty sure I changed it up from the last change, but make sure you want to look at Appendix E again. Okay, so let's just go through the first group. This is supergroup excavata. Excavata is referring to what they call an excavated groove on the side of the cell. So it looks like a little indentation on the side of the cell or organism. And this is kind of unique. It gives it sort of a folded look when you look at it under the microscope. First, just going over all of these kingdoms have that, all right? So all three of these have that, but there might be some variations on that. The diplomonads have 2 nuclei, and they have multiple flagella. Some of them have cytoplasmic extensions, and they may or may not be associated with that groove. And often these are parasitic. So Giardia is an example of that. I once had Giardia. It's not fun. It makes you really, really intestinally irritated. Parasolids have an undulating membrane, so they really look like, if you were to see them under the microscope, like they're sort of slithering through the water, so to speak, because their excavated groove it kind of flaps in the water, so it looks like a scarf or something blowing in the wind. So it's kind of interesting looking. And these also have multiple flagella. Examples of those are Trichomonas vaginalis. This is a vaginal infection. Then the euglenozoans, they have some special features. One thing is that they're both heterotrophic and photosynthetic. Some of them are mostly heterotrophic, and some of them are, like I just said, photosynthetic and heterotrophic. They all have what they call a spiral crystalline rod within their flagella. So it gives it kind of a, when you look at it under the microscope, it kind of reflects. And they have disc-shaped or disc-like cristae in their mitochondria. So that gives the mitochondria in this organism a somewhat special look too. The first phyla, kinetoplastids, have a single mitochondria with kinetoplast, which is a mass of DNA. So they really look quite a bit different, because most eukaryotes have multiple mitochondria. This one has just a really big one with this huge amount of DNA, or kind of mass of DNA. It sort of looks like a nucleus. And they have 2 types of DNA. They have mini and maxi DNA within the cell itself, so not within the mitochondria, but within the actual cell. And mostly these guys are heterotrophic or pathogenic. And some examples are trypanosoma, which is like sleeping sickness, the one that's spread with a tsetse fly, etc. Chagas disease, which is an insect vector also. It causes heart failure. And trichonympha, is in termite guts. And then you have the true euglenoids, and these are the ones that most of you probably think of as a euglena. You might have seen them under the microscope, even in Core 1, but you might have seen them in high school or something like that. And they have a typical shape to them with a flagella. Some of them have 2 flagellas. Mostly they're like about 1/3 autotrophic and 2/3 heterotrophic by absorption, which would be similar to fungi, not animals. But because they have flagella, they move like an animal. So this guy is like really a lot like all 3 groups. So they are very unusual little organisms. They have a stigma, or what they call eye spots. And those are light-sensitive organs, so it actually can direct them towards light. They also have something called paramylon. Paramylon is a glucose polymer, most likely created through the photosynthesis. So this would be sort of similar to a starch plastid. And then they have pellicles, which are protein strips that are in the membrane, and that most likely gives it some contractile ability, so it can move about. This overhead is showing you, if I can get it on here, the crystalline rod within the flagella. So you can see the flagella is the 9-2 arrangement of a typical flagella, and then these crystalline rods that give it kind of a reflective look under the microscope.